Well, hello everyone, and today I have something very exciting, which is I get the opportunity to sit down with two of my favorite indie fantasy authors, which is AC Wilson and Gandalf, apparently.
Hello.
No,
Warum.
Andrew D. Meredith, friend of the channel here.
Wait, if Andrew gets to be Gandalf, can I at least be Pippin? Like,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Comer
Yeah,
points.
I was
perfect.
gonna say if you have a pint. So,
Well, it's not quite a pint, but it is something.
do you like mushrooms, Amos? That's a real
I
question.
love mushrooms.
Okay,
Nice.
well, there
I
you
mean,
go.
only certain kinds. There's certain kinds I haven't tried yet, shall we say? But
That's all good. So before we get to the main topic, I guess I'll let you gentlemen introduce yourselves. Amos, since you're new to the channel here, why don't you go first?
sure. Okay, I'm AC Wilson. I'm a Christian independent author and poet. I write. The books I have written so far, at least, are black powder fantasy, young adult, with strong religious themes. So, there we go.
Hey.
And Andrew?
I am a Christian fantasy author, and I have written now 7 books in print, 7.5 books in print with a novella, and 2 more coming soon, and more to come, of course. But I write the Collation Saga, which is self-described as a sword and censer fantasy, because there's a lot of religious organizations and just religious discussions in over the course of the books. And then I also have my Needle and Leaf series, which is a Slavic fantasy series, and then not really religious at all is my Quaint Creatures fantasy, Cozy Fantasy, which is just about a veterinarian who runs a magical pet shop.
There you go. Well, thank you, gentlemen. So as you can tell, the theme of we're recording this at night, so the theme of tonight's discussion is religion in fantasy.
Surprise!
I know, shock. And I wanted to chat with both of you guys about it because I know you both deal with faith and religion prominently in your works, but also from very different. Both of you described yourselves as Christians, but you come at it from very different angles in terms of maybe your emphasis or the way it looks in your fantasy books. And I guess I'll start with this. So, sort of the first seed of really thinking about this more seriously and how the genre treats something as important as faith came from there's a couple points. One is it's been observed by the likes of, say, Christopher Rocchio, that fantasy and sci-fi, for being really like sister genres, it's weird that for many, many prominent science fiction stories, religion is completely surgically removed, any semblance of it. Star Trek is a famous example of this. At least if we're talking about the Skywalker saga, like there's not much of religion in something like Star Wars. It's like, okay, the Force, but like the closest you get is that's LARPing, and yet religion and issues of faith are very prominent in the fantasy genre. And there might be some different reasons for that. So I guess I'll ask the two of you, and Andrew, we'll start with you. Why do you think religion and ideas around faith and the supernatural are so important in this specific subgenre, where maybe it isn't in something else speculative, say like science fiction or maybe even horror?
Right. I'm glad you said horror. Yeah, I don't read horror, but it is a sister to the 3 sisters of spec fic that I've always looked at it as fantasy explores the soul, whereas and horror examines the psyche, and sci-fi examines the mind, examines the future, the things that could be, versus exploring the interior that both horror and fantasy do, looking into the what could have been, or how far can you go, what's the moral extremities that occur, especially in horror. And so they're examining different parts of what make us human, right? And so there's going to be some examination, and I think because they're all sisters, though, they can still have some crossover.
Yeah, Amos, do you have any thoughts on that, or that question as to why it's so prominent here?
The thing that I was thinking when you were asking the question is, in fantasy, like the supernatural is like part of fantasy. Like you kind of have to have a magic system or something supernatural in order for it to be fantasy. That's kind of defines the genre. And so if you're already admitting that the supernatural exists, then you kind of have to be bringing religion into it. That just otherwise it seems goofy. Whereas science fiction, like some science fiction will explore supernatural, but usually it tries to stay in like the area of reason and science, where religion is taken less seriously, probably. And so that's why I would assume that you see religion talked about a lot more in fantasy. But I mean, you still get a decent amount of, I mean, like the OG of science fiction, the planet, what's C.S. Lewis's planetary trilogy?
Oh, yeah, the
space
Ransom
trilogy.
books.
Yeah, the space trilogy. There we go. Yeah, like.
Yeah,
but you can't say the Ransom books because the Ransom books also include screw tape letters.
Oh, do they? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The screw tape letters in the forward, it says the screw tape letters are translated by Ransom.
Oh, you're kidding.
So it is technically it's technically part of the Ransom verse.
So you heard it here first, folks. The screw tape letters are technically science fiction.
Yes.
Who knew? So Amos, what you were saying a second ago reminded me. So DJ Butler, in addition to his excellent fantasy novels, is also known for, and being a well-known editor, is also known for a essay that he wrote a number of years ago called "Magic Systems Aren't Real Magic." And one of the main arguments that he makes in that is that the dividing line between what is technically magic and what is religion is very difficult to draw. That's a very difficult dividing line. They're almost inseparably linked.
And I would take that a step further and say, to a certain extent, the dividing line between science and religion gets really blurry. Like if you're taking like Greco-Roman religion, they literally believed the sun was a god. You couldn't refer to the sun as anything besides Helios. That's the same word for their god. They literally believed that he rode in a chariot across the sky. And that's a religious belief, but that's also a scientific belief. And like, I think in the same way that magic often gets presented in almost a scientific way in fantasy, science, like really a lot of religions do have major science claims in them. Even if those do change over time quite often in major religions. Like there still is the kind of, in the same, I'm just rambling now, but like in the same way that like religion does try to explain a lot of the world, and often that does include making claims about the science of the world. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an interdenominational argument between the branches of Christianity too. Like at what point is something a miracle, and what point can God use actual science to accomplish something, right?
Sam and I were literally having this conversation over Marco Polo like 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And so are there's moments when magic is meant to break the system. There's also times when it does, even in modern religion, follow rules of the world, whether something's pulling at the strings to cause, water to pile up on two sides of a river in a different way than it did at a sea, versus transubstantiation. So there's, and that will be argued until the end of time of when something is science and when it isn't, and that doesn't make something less miraculous whether it uses hard magic system rules versus soft.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true, and that's a good point. Both Amos and Andrew, and we'll talk about this more, and we'll circle back to this. But sort of the other, we're putting a bunch of pins and things, and the other thing I want to put a pin in is one of the things that got me thinking about this is even before I read any novels by New York Times bestselling author Brent Weeks, the fantasy author. I heard an interview with him where he was asked, sort of as one of the concluding rapid fire questions, what is the worst like fantasy or the laziest fantasy cliche in your mind? Oh, since I say Brent Weeks right there. Yeah, right there. And his answer was, he said, the laziest like fantasy world building cliche was having the Catholic Church be the source of like ultimate evil in like every other fantasy novel that he read. And that sort of cracked me up as for a genre that has such an emphasis in the supernatural and exploring the supernatural. There sure don't have there sure aren't a large number. There sure doesn't happen to be a large number of prominent authors who claim to be people of faith within the genre, at least in terms of really famous people, where it at least makes its way onto the page. I know people can argue about like, oh, Robert Jordan and things like that, but at least there isn't a whole lot of like, wow, look at that. That like really feels like a real religion that would be practiced. And so I guess with sort of that dissonance within the genre of like it's dealing with these prominent issues, but maybe not always in the most realistic or the best represented way. Why do you think that is? Amos, we'll start with you for this.
Man, I feel like when I'm thinking of big fantasy series that I feel like didn't do a good, realistic job of portraying religion, and then why that is, I'm thinking of like Dune, or I don't know, like I mean that's sci-fi, not fantasy, I suppose, or like the Church of the Sept in Game of Thrones. I feel like is it's not bad, but it's not great, and it doesn't really actually feel like a real religion. It just feels like a ripoff of Roman Catholic Church in 2 dimensions. And to me, it feels like this is a result of the author not really understanding the subject very well, and more just trying to make broad statements about institutionalized religion. And it kind of falls flat because it feels to me like you're not getting the actual lived experience of a person of faith. You're just kind of getting these broad strokes of an institution. And while you can have some interesting political backstabbingness, you're not actually understanding the internal feelings of what it actually feels like to be a person of faith. I don't know if that answers the question fully, but
yeah, Andrew, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good observation that it feels a bit like they don't understand the subject matter, and you can equate that to the same problem you see where fantasy authors, if you can tell when they don't know what a horse is or how to saddle a horse, right? Like it's a common discussion between writers is how do you show what you know and also avoid the things you don't know. And sometimes you just have to broad stroke and say they went to the stables and got some horses and then later they left. Okay, at least you acknowledge it takes till later to get on a horse. But most people don't know horses, and so you can get away with that. The vast majority of humans, probably Inhumans too, I don't know, have had religious experience, whether that is going to the church with their grandparents or whether they actually grew up in it or whether they hate it. And so they are projecting that into their own writing. But it becomes easier to identify when it's poorly executed, which I would argue is why it needs to be better cared for among all authors, whether you believe in something or not, just because it is so easy to get it wrong. But at this point, it's a trope. And so you can get away with 2-dimensionalizing religion because no one cares. No one cares because everybody expects it. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition, but they do expect religion to be done poorly in a fantasy book or just not well.
This might be a good time to interject my underlying philosophy that I realized this like last month, and I have been using this to, as I'm continuing to develop stories, this is going to become like a razor that I use to make sure I am doing this properly in stories, which is, to me, I want to be focusing on religion as character development instead of religion as world building. Because I think for a lot of fantasy authors like George R. Martin, for instance, since I used him before, religion is obviously there just for the world building.
Right.
It's not there to serve the interests of any of the characters themselves.
With basically the exception of like Ned Stark,
with Ned
Melisandre.
Stark,
that's it.
Yeah, exactly. But for the most part, the religion's just there as part of the world building, and that's fine. It's cool.
Right.
But for me personally, I want to be pushing myself to be taking the next level, to be saying, how does religion affect the characters? What is the character arc behind the religion?
That's cool.
Yeah, it's something one of you guys said a bit ago about them maybe not writing what they know about. With a lot of fantasy religion done badly, it just feels like another like political institution or political faction that's being written about.
Yes.
Yes. And it seems like, and I'm going to pick on like 3 authors that come to mind, and I can pick on them because I would largely describe myself as a fan or somebody who's enjoyed books by all 3 of these. Whether you look at guys like Joe Abercrombie, R. Scott Baker, or even recently I read Richard Swan's Justice of Kings, and like enjoyed it. Fun fantasy book, lots of stuff to enjoy in there. But with all 3 of those guys, when they write what is essentially just like evil Catholic Church, what you get is the perspective that they seem to be presenting is that this solely exists as a means of holding power over other people, and especially holding power over those that myself as the author perceives as being easily duped, maybe weak-minded, maybe easily manipulated, and seeing religion simply as a structure of power, which it only takes 2 seconds of observing the world around you or looking through history to see that it obviously serves a much greater function than that. Now that's an element of it, especially if you get into like cults and things like that, and everybody's seen bad pastors or had families who come from bad circumstances. I get that, but as a whole, as a generalization, when you're presenting here's my view of the world as told through a story, that is a very limited and very, to be perfectly honest, very modern way of viewing something that is so universal.
Yeah. And you can argue the same that you see with the chantry in Sun Eater. Is they were so there in book 1 and a bit in book 2, and then they just kind of disappear. And the background of Rockio and this his personal life story, I can understand why he pulled back on the chantry, even pulled them probably out of plot he already had planned for them to give them breathing space before whatever's. I haven't read 6 or 7 yet, but just getting to that point where he can, if they're part of the plot for the end, he can reintroduce them at the very end and take them to the finish line. But they kind of disappear between books 3 through 5 because they're not the villain. They're not the villain story that he's trying to tell. And so it was there to say, yes, of course, religion still exists 10,000 years in the future, even if it's been bastardized and changed over that time. But it's I thought it was a very masterful stroke to be able to say, I need to pull back from this because it's not important, as opposed to constantly dropping chantry and just to tick people off as they're reading constantly. It's not about that. We know there's bad actors, and that's who he's interacted with, but that doesn't speak for the chantry as a whole because of that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Amos, I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that greater issue or not?
The thing that came to mind when you were talking about that was, I don't know, have you Andrew read The Way of Adan by Philip Chase?
I've started the first one.
You started the first one.
Yeah.
What I liked in that is kind of how he is using the trope of like the evil Catholic Church, but he is also at the same time using the character perspectives of people who are simply bad actors in that system, or who are actually trying to do good within that system. And that is something that you don't see very often, is people using the trope of the evil Catholic Church, but doing it in a much more nuanced and realistic way.
Right.
So,
which is what I appreciated in both Name of the Rose and Pillars of the Earth.
I was going to say,
you see bad actors and not.
So,
yeah.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say,
to a certain extent, you get that in Deathless Beast too. I mean, I'm assuming it's not a big reveal later on that the the paladins are actually the evil force in the world. I'm assuming that's not going to happen. Maybe you're going to surprise me, but
no. Well, there's a different order you meet that does that, but no.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But I like how, yes, you had the institution.
Yeah.
There you weren't playing with the trope of the evil Catholic Church, but
no.
You had the institution, and you're playing with kind of the idea of the institution and then the actors within the institution and how that translates to their own personal faith within the broader institution, which I loved that.
Thank you. Yeah. I it's not a spoiler that I constantly dangle to everybody that Dane is my Humperdinck, and he never dies, but he will tick you off every single book.
So what is it that if say there's an author and he's looking to write a fantasy book and he wants religion to be a big part of it, but he's personally an atheist, or he personally doesn't have encounters with faith, like certainly it can't be, the standard cannot be, well, you need to have like a personal spiritual experience or need to be part of some like religious order in order to represent this properly. Like, what is it that those people are missing that they should more be looking for to include in their work to make it feel more accurate to, as Amos said, people's lived experiences?
Amos?
See, I feel like there is an element of just like a completely different way of viewing the world. And there's probably, whatever religion you hold, you have just a completely different way of viewing the world that is just difficult to get that authentic voice if you're not in that religion. Like, I couldn't have written Fiddler on the Roof, like I can watch that and be like, oh, this is so Jewish. I could never write that because there's just simply a different way of viewing the world, a different way of like perceiving time, even, that you know it when you see it, but if you're outside that culture, you're not going to be able to write it very well.
Right.
So I mean, that, I don't know what advice I would give someone who's, I don't know anyone personally who is an atheist and has always been an atheist. Most people I know who are atheists grew up in some kind of religion and became atheists later in life. And for those people, like, they obviously have the experience of having been a person of faith that they can be drawing from. Someone who's like, it is hard for me to wrap my brain around someone who's never experienced religion, because I feel like those aspects of your life that are religion, you're going to be finding that somewhere else. Whether that's how you define truth or how you view the world, your concepts of the afterlife. So, yeah, I don't know what I would say someone who's never experienced religion before, how to write religion well.
Yeah, and it may be a badly formulated
that's
hypothetical too, in terms of what I'm trying to get at here. But
so research is key. My wife always jokes because she writes mysteries, so she gets to do all the research at the archives for historical. But you write fantasies, you don't do research, and that's just not true. Especially when it comes to religion, is getting yourself read up on first the truths that the religion you're trying to emulate has. So you're trying to design something for a fantasy setting, and you want a new religion. The question is, is it just dressing? So it just needs to be the stand-in for medieval Catholic Church, or are you looking for something that's going to create a large plot point in the story? And if someone says, okay, well, I'm going to look at, I'm an atheist, but I was raised in non-denominational Baptist church. Okay, so don't look at that. Go look at something that you don't quite get, but is sideways of you. So whether that, Catholic or Orthodox or something that gives you a framework for which to build from, and then nail down what the truths in your book will be. And that could be, as if you want to go off completely off the side, you could say, I'm going to look at Orthodox and then look at a heresy that the Orthodox hate and make that the established truth, the actual truth. And then the heresy is the other direction, back towards what we would perceive as orthodoxy in our world as the heresy to anyway. But just like when FBI agents are studying counterfeits, you study the real dollars so that you can identify the counterfeits. They don't study the counterfeits. The first thing they do is learn the real so that they can create counterfeits. But if you're trying to create a well-established religion, it needs to have both, not Eastern Orthodoxy, but the orthodoxy of the religion, and it needs heresies that have spun off because of bad actors or stupidity, and write those down. What's the stupidity thing? What's the bad actor who's trying to manipulate people into his cult? And how does that spin off from the truth you've established? Well, I don't understand what Trinity means, but I can conceptualize duality where there's only two. Okay, that's your start. There's ways that you can play with these truths, whether you ever show them in the book or not. If you know what they are, it lets you also seed the world with little lines. Like someone says, I pray to both. What do you mean? Well, that's this, that. I don't know what it means. That's what you're supposed to say. You say, I pray to both. Well, what do you mean? What do you mean? So there's lots of little, world building things you can do when you're developing a religion just based off of the knowledge. And the fact that you are an author who's an atheist writing means puts you in a different position when you're going to choose to research this thing for the sake of having a good seed for what you're writing. So research is key in all directions, but don't get bogged down. The last thing you want is world building syndrome and you never finish the world building.
Yes.
Well, I think
that makes me think of something that makes religions feel really real to me when I see them in fantasy is when you have like a depth of piety within a religious structure. Because like obviously with all religions, you're going to have the Theobros basically who are know all of these doctrinal statements inside out and they argue about the minutia of stuff. And then you're going to have people who are basically, they subscribe to the religion more as like a social identity sort of thing. They don't really think really much about the doctrine. They maybe go to church once a week. They hang out with people within their faith group, but for them the religion is more of a social identity. Or you have people who again don't think much about the doctrines, but they've got a really rich prayer life within the faith. And so when you can have that kind of a diversity of experience and that depth of piety within a single religion, I think that adds a lot of, that is one of the things to me that really makes a fantasy religion like, oh, this feels real.
Right. And the why are they pious? Is it the mother that goes to church 5 times a week because she's praying for her daughter who married and left the city and she hasn't seen her in 10 years? Or is it out of guilt? And does the super pious who's just constantly fronting do it because they're hiding something, because they're doing it for power, or because they genuinely believe it? And all 3 of those are valid and should have some representation at some point. Just because if you don't have that last one, you just end up with bad guys who are using it as a balm to escape their guilt.
Yeah.
When you're talking about like the why there, Andrew, makes me think of I just did a lot of reading of like Conan this last month, and catching up on the stories from Robert E. Howard that I hadn't read. And like, I love Conan. Like, Robert E. Howard's a genius, but like, it does crack me up when it's like, ooh, here's this like ancient like death cult where all of the members of this cult are like sacrificed to an eldritch god. It's like, and who's signing up for this? Like, who's like responding to the human sacrifice hotline of like, I'm in, yes, please.
Which you even see that in the Bible. I was just reading Elijah versus the priests of Baal. And when Elijah is mocking the priests who have been, flagellating themselves and nothing's working, and he goes, I don't know, maybe he's off on a quest or napping or relieving himself. I don't know. What do you guys think? When I was reading it this time, I realized, I wonder if he's actually quoting back the words the priests say to the people since they've been in a 3-year drought. That this storm god who doesn't show up, and everybody says, can you please have Baal send rain? And they're like, well, he's not here in Israel right now. He's off on a journey. So if we pray enough and spend enough sacrifice, maybe he'll come back and do it. But he's sleeping. And so it's you can see those little things that are total human move that a priest's like, I don't even know, whatever, just keep praying, it'll be fine. And it's like, yeah, okay, thanks for being pious, because we often view big religion as just made up of people who do nothing but be big religion, and that's just their Sunday persona. That doesn't mean they don't have day jobs running. Even the big cathedrals have to be run by administrators, and they're administrating during the week, and you can show that to humanize so much of it, in the same way that you can humanize government or a tradie who's working in the smithy. Just showing humanity is a way to make your any of your world building feel more real and lived in.
When you said I think it was you, Andrew, who said a minute ago about like what are central truth claims that the religion makes, and I was just today having this conversation with somebody about the difference between like faith and belief, and why do you come to faith, and like what would be what are some of the reasons for that. And one of the things that I was just talking about is that you shouldn't just believe in a certain religion or in a certain set of religious ideas because of social pressure or because of fear of like some consequence, like, oh, turn or burn, something like that. It should be because you believe that the majority of the truth claims made by that religion are accurate,
Right.
And so it's not just like, oh, join with my group. It's like, no, I think that these people actually, that the majority of the things that are taught here are true. And I think sometimes you can miss that especially if you're like fantasy world building. Like Amos has it easy because he's just like, copy, paste.
Pretty much.
Not actually, but
well, at least for this series. I think Sam has read my next book that is still in beta, but I think I do some more interesting things in that book. So.
Yeah. But like when you're just making up a religion whole cloth, it can be easy to be like, oh, and like the gods and doctrines, and here are the orders and stuff, without being like, okay, what are the basic fundamental claims about life and about human nature and about community that the religion is trying to get across, and this is part of the structure of the faith beliefs that they have, rather than like, ooh, pantheons, look, isn't world building fun?
That does, though, this idea that like you are choosing your religion based off of whatever truth claims you find most persuasive, I do think is a modern thing.
That's probably true. Yeah.
In like most fantasy obviously tends to reflect a medieval reality, and like in medieval times, you were pretty much born into religion. You didn't get a choice to pick your religion. Or if you were born into like the Greco-Roman period, like, I mean, you could kind of, I guess, choose what gods you were going to most strongly associate with. But even then, these truth claims have already been decided. And so I think that's another interesting thing that you can explore in, I mean, any kind of book, but especially in a fantasy book, is like that interaction between someone's personal faith and what they find meaningful, and the realities on the ground of just the system they're born into, the religion they are born into, or the religions they have access to, because no one can actually really choose their own religion. You've got a handful. Sometimes you can pick between them, but oftentimes, really, like, especially, if you're in England, you're born in 14th century England, you are a Christian. Like, you didn't have a choice. And then how does that play out in your personal life? How does the lived reality of your religion? Anyway, there's a thought.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities to. I think part of the issue that we can see in poorly portrayed religion is the villain is that then churches is shown as the villain that creates villains. And I'm not just saying the villains who creates villains in the church, but those who create it out of the church because of abuse or whatever that is. Right. But I think in the same way that it's pretty lazy for an author to fall back on something bad happening to a female character as a means to create plot, right? And it's okay. How do you avoid fridging? And I think you can still have really good plot lines that are created from not that church was bad and did the thing, but church made this promise, and this bad thing occurs to a person, and so they become a villain, become a completely mercenary crusader who's just absolutely debauched because they went to war and saw humanity for what it really is and how could God allow this. And now you've got a different sort of plot. Is it the church's fault, or can he then be struggling with, well, the church back there at home is naive and they don't really know the world. Now you've got a much richer plot, not based off of vilifying the church, but vilifying naivete that's occurred because of those who haven't actually experienced badness, evil incarnate.
Amos, something you said reminded me, just talking about that being a modern religious conflict. I was reading a fantasy book recently. I was talking about this with Andrew, that was set in a vaguely ancient past, I think ancient Greece, whatever, and was asking some questions about religion and our relationship to it and our relationship to faith and all of these things, and had arguments about one religion versus another and how can you know that what you believe is true. And I said, there's a little bit of a disconnect here, where in a lot of the setting and world building and the way the characters think and process the world feels very old, feels very antique. There's a lot of non-modern values that are being espoused, and fighting for glory and things that aren't necessarily seen as like, oh, well, that's like feels like the people feel very ancient in that sense. But the religious questions and the religious debates felt not just modern, but like modern Protestant, and many of the arguments like they were off of Reddit. And maybe that's me being uncharitable, but I know that's something that I think I've talked about with both of you, of why, and I get it, it's because it's a big, massive religion, especially in America, but like why so much of religious representation in fantasy feels very Protestant as well. And not just that, but like 21st century Protestant, like you would think.
Or Enlightenment is the other.
Yeah.
Right.
I read this book, A Man at Arms by Stephen Pacey. Stephen Pressfield. Overall, I did enjoy the book. And kind of like the idea is that like this guy is hired by the Roman government to steal the letter of First Corinthians that Paul is trying to send to the Corinthians. It was a really cool concept, but they're having these religious discussions around like Christianity, and just like specifically like the idea of Jesus fainting on the cross and being buried. And I was just like, this does not feel like the way you're talking about these does not feel accurate to how a first century Greek would be asking questions like this. Like this feels like Enlightenment era discussions of religion and Jesus's life. So yes.
Especially it sounds like written before the whole canon of scripture has actually been finished.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned in one of our conversations, Amos, the question of like where you'll have in fantasy books where people will be like, but if God is good, why do bad things still happen? And it's like, this is a very modern issue for like modern people to grapple with.
And that is an issue unique to monotheism, right? Like if you are in a polytheistic universe, that issue is the stupidest question you could like. Can you imagine sitting down with Homer and being like, well, if Zeus is real, why do bad things happen? And Homer's like, have you talked to Zeus lately? Like, you expect Zeus to be good? Like, where does that idea like?
Yeah, well, and also just like the interplay of, what do you mean Zeus? How do you know Poseidon didn't do it? Like,
right.
Yeah, but what about, okay, is Poseidon good? Well, if maybe it was Hades. I mean, so you can obfuscate an audience. Yeah.
I mean, even the idea of a ultimate good in polytheism is kind of a difficult concept. Like that is kind of a
It makes me
wonder. To already agree with monotheism in order to start positing an ultimate good.
It makes me wonder how that's interpreted from peoples outside of Western culture. So, like, I've talked to other people about how like we are lucky because we grew up in the 80s, 90s, and beyond, that we had like kung fu movies, right? And just the act of kung fu movies, and then later in the late 90s, early 2000s, the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and the good Chinese cinema we started getting. A Chinese fantasy is not impossible for us to even relate to. An anime as well down too. So anime has started to contribute to that. It's why like K-pop Demon Hunter is such a great show, because we already have the nomenclature put in place for us to appreciate it as a genre. But we are only just now starting to get East Indian fantasy. And to someone from the West, it just looks like East Indian mythology. But someone from India is going to look at it and go, no. This is new. This is so new and different from in any Indian mythology, because there's this new thing. And to us, it doesn't look that cool. We haven't built the nomenclature into our system. So it makes you wonder if our projection of Western Protestant and Catholic thought backwards into fantasy is even noticeable by those who don't see it for what it is, because we're in it. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just something I've wondered.
Yeah, that may very well be. So Andrew, as somebody who, because like, you know, you mentioned Collation obviously has got a lot of religion and pantheon and paladins and elements in it. But then also there's some like religious things that are handled in Thrice.
Right.
As somebody, and you said at the beginning, you know, I'm a Christian, I write fantasy, and here's sort of the deal. But your books don't read like it, in the sense of, you know, it doesn't read like, I mean, no offense to the man, but like, you know, Ted Dekker or Chuck Black,
Right.
You know, what is kind of perceived as like cheesy Christian fantasy. So what sort of makes the difference there between cheesy Christian fantasy, what you write, and I guess how do you sell somebody on it without making somebody worry that you're just using this as a separate pulpit?
Right. I would compare myself to someone more like Lawhead, in that Lawhead is a Christian who writes fantasy. And Lawhead writes in medieval settings that have magic as well, but he has no problem dancing between theology and marrying it into the story, even though it isn't the point of the story. And so that was something I set out to do when I was writing, is I wanted to be a Christian who writes fantasy. And your worldview, no matter what your worldview, and people can come at me in the comments, will come through in your books. You can do as much as you can to not obfuscate, but acknowledge it. Well, that is actually one of the best ways to inoculate yourself against your worldview getting in the way of the plot. So if you we've already talked about someone who is an atheist who wants to write, some of that view is going to come through, and that's okay. And I know you, especially Samwise, when you were reading Pillars of the Earth, could see that in the way that he was writing, in the same way that I felt he was being gracious to the church as well, because he wrote characters who believed, and he never made fun of them. He never makes fun of Philip as a character. Philip believes, and what Philip believes is true. And whether that is true or not is the question, because there's no actual miracles that are seen, or are they? So he is very gracious, I think, in that sense. And I try to do that too. You know, how it's part of that research again too, is how do you ensure you have everything Iron Manned? You have Steel Man. All your arguments are Steel Manned, except when you want them to be Straw Manned, because you want a villain who's going to fall on his own sword, or hoisted by his own petard. So he needs to be a straw man. So how do you set up a straw man by design, but isn't at the denouement, so it isn't your coming to Jesus moment in your book that just becomes completely, empty and vapid. But so does that answer the question?
I think so.
Yeah.
And so, Amos, for you, you've got a little bit of a different challenge in that, at least in the Gwambi books, it's fantasy. It's not our world. There's half a dozen fantasy races. Some are familiar, some are foreign. But you essentially have recreated a very familiar religious setting in the Gwambi book. So what have been challenges for you in terms of writing that to not make it feel just like a pulpit, or just like, hey, I joked earlier about copy and paste. I don't think that's actually what you're doing. So, just if you could talk about some of your world building with that a bit.
Yeah. I think initially the problem I had was writing a religious group that was basically who I believed was correct, and then the other religious groups were wrong in some way. And that is how I started writing the book. And then, as Sam knows, I went through a series of deconstructing and a lot of changing in my own personal faith beliefs as I was writing the book and then re-editing it later, which meant that then I was able to then, when I re-edited it and actually got it published, be able to be more honest about, no, these different denominations of churches in this world, they're all trying to find the truth in some way. I don't view any of them as actually fully there. So yeah, for me, I was wanting, growing up, I wanted a fantasy book that actually explored like the lived experience of being a Christian specifically. And so I was like, I mean, most fantasy books accept that horses are real, even though it's a fantasy world. I mean, except Deathless Beast.
There's humans on another
but there's
world,
humans, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I love the Sleipnirs. That was the Sleipnirs. I can pronounce that, I hope. But like, and nobody goes like, there's horses in this fantasy world. That's dumb. He was just borrowing horses. And I was like, well, like, why can't we see that in religions? I'm like, I mean, this is basically fantasy Christianity. It's upfront. Like, they literally refer to the Savior as the Christ. And that's just what the series is. Like, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. Most of what I'm trying to do is just depict the lived experience of being a character of faith, and specifically being a Christian, because that's what I know. And so, yes, one of the churches, the Kirk, is highly, highly inspired by Presbyterians, Scottish Presbyterians from the 18th century, because that was the books I was reading, was these hagiographic writings of these Scottish Presbyterians from the 18th century. And so the Eldarian Church is, yeah, they're Presbyterian. They are. There's a couple tweaks to their religious ideas, but that's what they are. The Rectificationists are Anabaptists. Like, that's who they are. Like, I mean, there's some fantasy gloss in there, but I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. And really, the specific theologies of the different churches, the specific doctrines they're upholding, are mostly gloss. Most of what the point of the book is the personal faith journey, and specifically how God meets each of the characters where they are at. So, not to spoil anything, but like, there's the one character who believes that miracles are impossible, that God does not perform miracles anymore, that has passed. And so God can never actually work in her faith journey with a miracle. She always has to be experiencing the world in a naturalistic way, and that's how God meets her. Versus the other character who believes that miracles are possible, does experience miracles in the course of the book. And I think that's just kind of reflecting my belief that, yes, like, God meets you where you're at. You don't have to have perfect theology. It's a relationship.
Yeah. Andrew, I'd like to, unless you have thoughts specifically on that.
No.
I have something to bounce over towards you. It's kind of on something that Amos said here, and then I also like to hear Amos's thoughts on this as well, which is, I think this is another distinction between if a religion that is represented in the fantasy world is done well or not, is that idea of certainty and knowing the fullness of the truth about what is being explored here. So you look at, I don't know, I'll pick on somebody like Sanderson. Like, as a reader, when you're reading about what is going on with, you know, the gods and the magic and all of this, you have you get to a certain point in many of his series where you have a certain level of like omniscient knowledge, where it's like certain characters might be parts of different sects. Like there's a, to avoid spoilers here, there's a certain church that's almost like a cult of personality that springs up in the second Mistborn book because of a character's actions in the first Mistborn book. And we know that what they're following is incorrect beliefs, but like all of the characters who are part of this believe it. But there's a sense of certainty as the reader where, like, you know what the truth is. And you contrast that to something in like A Song of Ice and Fire, where there's some weird supernatural things going on. And Melisandre claims that, like, oh, it's the Lord of Light working here and here. But then you see things happening that are, like, also supernatural that are counter to it and look more like claims of another belief system. And there's a lack of clarity on what exactly is going on. And I think that is accurate to like real life people of faith and their experiences, whether it's, as Amos talked about, miracles or whatnot. So what is sort of the balancing act between certainty, having a certain amount of obscuring what's really going on, and not just revealing to the reader, but also to the characters, that makes it good or bad when you're writing about faith?
It's a very good question. I don't know the full answer. I mean, I would pull back to say that like part of you deciding as an author what is the truth doesn't mean you have to reveal what that is. Like you can have an overall, this is the actual truth, in the same way that we to our children say, if you cross the street, you will die. Because they're 3 and I want to put the fear in them so they don't walk into the street. And when they're 5 or 6, they're like, well, can I go out in the street? It says, yeah, go ahead. There's no one coming. Like, well, I'll die. No, you won't. I said that because you were 3, and I'm not going to sit down and have a philosophical discussion on how to cross the street, right? And so you can have greater truths, and the lesser truths are no less true. They just are a simplified version. So you can set things up in a way that, and there's also things that you won't know as the author. You might have something where here's the truth. And then as you're writing, you get books and books deep and you realize there's something that you didn't realize you kind of, maybe you put in there or you didn't, because it's just this underlying truth that the truth speaks to, that you can then use as a plot point to reveal something even greater that then, even the readers can't know because you didn't know as the author. And that's okay too. You don't have to know everything. But you should know enough to make things realistic. I feel like the other thing you can worry about too is like, how do you convey deeper truths versus mysteries? And I mean, like in the religious sense, that how can you develop a cult like Masonism or something like that creates something that is obviously human invented as a means of control because it's deeper secrets that only this certain people can know, versus this is not important, but it is. And the more you study, the more you'll realize this truth, as opposed to being revealed the truth. And I think there's ways that, in the same way that talking earlier about whether someone is going to church out of guilt or going to church out of piety, they can both lead to the same thing in the end because they reach the same goal. There are other ways that you can, kind of skirt around goals in order to get to things that provide these little plot points that maybe they don't affect the plot at all. Maybe they're just something that gives you a reveal for a tertiary character that then makes people really want you to write a spin-off novella or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Amos, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. I know you mentioned in the Gwambi books, it's pretty straightforward as far as, let me rephrase that. It may seem somewhat straightforward as far as characters' faith journeys, but I know especially in the tentatively titled Legend of Saint Gnarl books that you're also working on, that deal with maybe some more, how would you say, other versions of faith, maybe some pagan elements and the push and pull between those. What's sort of your take on that, of like certainty, lack of certainty, knowledge that you're giving to the reader, but then also knowledge that the characters have?
I will probably always err on the side of uncertainty and obfuscation, partly because I think that is one of the things I love about religion, is how so many of the truth claims cannot be verified or disproven. Like, it is just, you have to take it on faith. And so I love the uncertainty and the ability to hold plural truths. When you have these, like, you cannot prove or like the afterlife, this cannot be proved or disproved. You just have to accept it. And so I personally love that about religions in general. And so I'm always going to err on the side of less certainty when I'm depicting a religion. And again, because my goal in most of my fantasy is not necessarily to be depicting a fully coherent spiritual world. My goal is always the internal experience of the character. And so obviously no character, I mean, if character is dead certain about something, that tells you something about the character, that doesn't necessarily tell you something about the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I love having characters wrestling with the unknown and the difficult to process and the seeming contradictions within a faith system. Yeah, I'm really excited about the Legend of Saint Gnarl series, the What Immortal Hand book, where because of that, I don't think a lot of people think about the difference between a polytheistic religion and a monotheistic religion, and how that mindset shift just would affect everything about a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And having a character go through that mindset shift and then try to implement it, try to convert his family and his friends, and try to teach his whole community, like that's not a simple shift. Like that is that, and I mean, on Earth, it didn't, like, that was a slow process for in our world, that shift between believing in a plurality of gods versus a single god. Like, what would that happen in the course of a generation? Like so I won't get too deep into that, but that is, again, that doesn't actually tell you anything about the underlying truth of the world. I'm more interested in how it affects the character and their lived experience and the societies they have created, how that faith system affects that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we're writers of books and not RPGs, right?
Exactly.
We don't need everything written down. We're exploring something. It was I know I quoted a lot, but Steven Erikson said, I think it was Steven Erikson who said, fantasy is metaphor made manifest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're writing is metaphors. We're not writing RPG. We're not writing role-playing games. Not that we don't all want an RPG for our world setting, because we do, but we aren't writing world books that are meant to be consumed by everybody. We're writing stories, and what we're putting into our stories is just a tool to reach that story.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll ask a question that's for both of you, and whoever speaks it first gets to answer. Do you think when writing a fantasy book where it's obviously not reflecting a real world religion necessarily, maybe it's something yourself or a different author made up, but just when discussing religion in general, people of faith, is there a certain responsibility that you as an author need to take into account if you're either praising it or criticizing it as a subset of people who believe one thing?
I mean, basically, it's just a question of, like, are you breaking the first commandment if you create a new religion? Is that basically what this question is getting into?
Well, I mean, hey, that'd be an interesting question. I guess it's more like if you're going to be writing about a group of people, say like people of faith, is there a certain responsibility as an author to represent them in a certain way, to do a certain amount of research, to have a certain level of understanding of the topic, if you're going to be writing about that? And I guess, is that something that you guys take into account? And if so, what does that look like for you? I don't know. But once again, maybe not a very well formulated question.
I think the responsibility is first to yourself, but second to your intended audience. So if I piss off somebody because I have religion in my books, maybe my books aren't for you. I'm sorry I had religion. It's not really a me problem at that point. But I do have a responsibility to tell as good a story that I can do. Like, right. Like if I write 10 books and in my 10th book I finally just drop the ball, then I've probably dropped my responsibility, or my responsibility has, the audience that I'm responsible for has shifted, because maybe I'm now writing to a totally different audience. So I guess the question is have I betrayed my original audience by changing that? Hopefully I will have taken the time to notice that. Hopefully I will have taken the time to foreshadow the things that I've done in book 10 early on, and that it's not out of the blue. And people say, well, now you're a religious in book 10. You're like, well, it's kind of there the whole time. If you didn't notice it, it's your problem. But, so there is a responsibility to, maybe it was you, Sam, that asked me, how do you make sure that by book 10, you're still writing the same book? Mm-hmm. You're still writing the same quality and style. And one, you can't. I mean, Rockio is a good example of that. Is book 1 as well written as the other ones? No, and he'll admit it. He finally figured out how to write a book, probably in book 2 or 3. But in his first book, he was still figuring it out. And so that's why it's so episodic. So there's going to be growth as an author over time. Because there's very few authors that can write an entire series and then go back and edit the whole thing to make sure it's equal. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Amos?
Yeah. My only thought on that is like, I think the big point you would cross a line is like, if you have a specific, like if you believe, like if you do not follow this specific doctrine, you are burning in hell for all eternity. You probably should not be writing characters, or at least protagonists, who have subscribed to that doctrine that you like if you hold specific religious views that strongly, then you should probably be writing characters that also subscribe to similar religious views. You probably should not be trying to write characters who disagree with you. I don't know if that answers the question, but
that's interesting. So just to follow that thought, is there benefit in writing characters who have like very much a divergent worldview from yourself, even just as like an exercise in being a better writer, do you think?
I mean, like, there definitely would be value in listening to that perspective for sure. I think it would have to, the question is like, how opposite are you trying to go? Mm-hmm. Like, to me, I'm never going to write a character that's like, I don't know, like a psychopathic monarchist. Like, that is just, I would have no business writing that character as a hero, because I can't see that character as heroic. Anytime I write that character, he's gonna be the villain. That's probably too extreme, but I guess there's a difference between writing a character who sees the world a different way from you and using that character to kind of reflect on that, versus writing a character that fundamentally you disapprove of. And in that case, you probably should be writing a different book.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Well, that makes sense what you're saying there. Yeah. One, as we're kind of getting near the end of at least the questions that I had here, one other thing that I wanted to touch on, just see if you guys had thoughts on this. It's not really a question per se, but it's like, people when they're talking about like Lord of the Rings in any like deeper sense, like it'll often come up that Tolkien is Catholic. Many people will write off C.S. Lewis entirely just based on the fact of like, oh, the big kitty was Jesus, don't you know? But the funny thing with both of them, both being like outspoken people of faith, is that neither of those books or series like have religion at all. Like of any kind.
Organized, yeah.
Like, okay, like, yes, if you use religion in the broadest sense of like a habit of virtue, giving to God what he deserves, it's like, okay, like, yes, a relationship with Aslan, I guess you can translate across. But in terms of any, like you said, organization, structure, liturgy, anything like that, it's kind of absent. Which I don't know. Like I said, not really a question, but I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that or about like how we got from there to here or anything.
I mean, like on the C.S. Lewis of it all, like, yes, he is not actually trying to depict religion in those books. He's usually just trying to depict a specific religious concept. And in many ways, it's similar to Ursula K. Le Guin. I love her writing, and she makes you think very hard. But again, she doesn't depict religion, but she often is trying to explore a religious concept or a philosophical concept. And yeah, I think that is a different thing with different pitfalls and different peaks and valleys to doing that versus trying to explore religion as a lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I don't know, Andrew, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think that they are both exploring their world using the lens of their writing to explore their own world. Like especially if you look at Lewis, both in even Last Battle and Great Divorce, he's obviously working through something because they both have similar subject matter with farther up and farther in happening in both of those two different worlds in what he's working in. So it's obviously a concept that he's currently working through in the same way that Tolkien set out to create a mythology of Anglo-Saxon England, yet elves are never the main characters. And but it's all about the elves, and it's like okay, but you never talk about them all. They're just kind of there, yeah, but they're underlined. Yeah, but you could have made Aragorn an elf. I don't know, but the point is like that was what he was working through. You see the same thing in game design. Uwe Rosenberg, you can look at his whole breadth of all the board games he's done as a experimental progression, game to game to game, as he's trying to find the perfect game. And so there's ways. So as authors, we're exploring something, we're heading towards something. And I think it was about a month ago, Cam Weiland had which is her blog is helping writers become authors. She had a whole blog essay on that. There are themes that you can probably see in all your books, like what, and I write an epic, a Slavic, and a cozy. But I can look at it from especially the farther and farther I write, I can look backwards and say, oh, there is an overwhelming theme that sits across all of my books, no matter what I write. Even if it's hard to spot unless you're really looking at it directly. But no matter what I write, and I think it goes back to what you were saying, Amos, that, can you write something that's diametrically opposed to yourself? I think you probably can, but also what are you trying to, what is that exercise's purpose? If over the course of the next 20 years you're writing, and then 20 years from now I'll call you out if you write a villain who's the main character, but maybe that's a villain who's a shadow of something you've been exploring all along, and this becomes the culmination of what you've been working through as an author and as a human being, and it outpours as a villain's arc. You can look at Shakespeare writing both tragedies and comedies, and what depths of exploration is he working through? Not when he's writing Titus Andronicus and trying to just make a point, but when he's writing Hamlet and really exploring that. Well, you see the same thing happening in Hamlet as you do in the Scottish play. They're exploring mortality and morality at the same time in those characters that he's writing, whether they're villains or heroes, because he is exploring something. But what it is, that's what we get to debate and discuss for 600 years now.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I'll kick this over to you guys. I did mention, if you guys have any thoughts on the topic that you either wanted to bounce around or ask about, I'd guess I'd be open to hearing any further thoughts or questions from you guys. If not, do you have examples of fantasy or speculative fiction that come to mind where you're like, here's an example where somebody, besides our esteemed guests, where they nailed it, or where you felt like it was represented really well?
Okay. This one took me so much by surprise, and I don't know why more people are not talking about this one. Have either of you watched Win or Lose, the Pixar TV show?
No, I remember you talking to me about it, but I have not watched it.
The central conceit of the show is that each episode is from a different character's point of view, so this doesn't hold true of the entire show. But the first episode, the point of view character is like a devout Catholic preteen, and they nailed the experience of religious scrupulosity. And I did not expect Pixar, of all studios, to go there. And it was so well done, down to like the visuals are echoing Pilgrim's Progress, the load of sin on her back, and I was just like, this is insane. Like, especially from Pixar, you don't expect them to be just nailing the experience of religion. And I mean, that is a little bit of a negative experience of religion, because she is working through that, the feeling of, is there a secret sin in my life that is why I can't succeed? But I mean, that's an emotion I felt hardcore. So yeah, that was, it's, I don't know, it's a piece of media that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, but I thought was just phenomenally portrayed the experience of being a religious character.
Yeah.
I'll throw out Silence by Endo, which is also a movie.
Is that the one about like the missionaries to Japan?
Yes.
I've heard really good things about that.
I will openly admit I've not read the book, but I have seen the movie, and it will wreck you. But it's balance between Christianity and the very logical secularism of Japan needing Christianity to not be there. And from that, it opened my mind to being able to look at ancient Rome and what was Rome's goal with destroying Christianity. It's not as nefarious as you think it is. It's humanity. If you ever watched it's the movie that's with Joseph Fiennes as the centurion who's investigating.
Risen.
Right. Yeah. Does the same thing. You know, it is necessary to stop this cult from rising, because it will break the status quo. It is necessary to do so from a secular point of view. And Silence portrays that really, really well. And then I just thought of another one. So come back to me. Your turn.
Okay, so the other one that I love the depiction of religion is Hacksaw Ridge. Is another great look at the internal experience of being a character of faith, and like he comes to his religious beliefs. He's not going to commit violence. He's drafted in, and then like the persecution he's facing by his fellow people, and then just like the moment on the ridge when he's like, I can't hear you, to God. It's just like, this is such good writing and such a good depiction of the experience of the tension between the faiths, these beliefs that you are holding on to, and then the brutal reality of the world you're living in, and the tension with holding those two things and refusing to let go of either of those. And yeah, I love that.
Nice.
Yeah, so just I want to touch on Hacksaw Ridge there really quickly, because it's an interesting point. So I was just Googling really quickly. So Desmond Doss saved 75 guys on Hacksaw Ridge. And what's funny is the actor who plays him in the movie, Andrew Garfield, said, you know, when they were making it, they're like, all right, so like we can use like I forget whether it was like cables to hold the bodies up or body doubles, you know, so that you're not like, having to carry actual like, you know, full people on your back. And he's like, dude, I've been working out, I've been getting ready for this, like as we're filming these, like no, like we'll do the real thing, you know. And he said by the second guy, he was like, no, absolutely not, you know, like bring in the doubles. Yeah. Like and Desmond Doss did this for 75 guys. And if you've ever seen pictures of the real life Desmond Doss, he's like skinny as a bean, you know. And Doss looked back on it and claimed that it was a miracle that he was able to save all those people. And the, you know, some of the more secular people around him are just like, oh, you know, strength of man's will triumphing, you know, or whatever. And so that's an interesting example of sort of what we talked about earlier, where person of faith looks at this and says, there is no way physically or naturally that you can come up with an explanation for this other than the power of God helping me through this impossible task. And yet somehow, oh, there's always a way to explain it away. Oh, there's some natural reason for it too. Which is, I guess, why they call it faith.
Yeah. Funny note, Andrew Garfield plays the priest in
That's right. Yeah.
Silence. So, yeah. I will throw out Lois McMaster Bujold's World of the Five Gods. It is a really, really good depiction of medieval specific fantasy.
This is
So
Curse of the Chalian?
Yeah, Curse of Chalian is the first one, and they're all standalone. It's set in a world that is like Spanish. It's set in a similar setting to the Romance of Ferdinand and Isabella. So two characters are effectively Ferdinand and Isabella as young people, and it's their story towards them coming together. But all the magic is based on what if medieval magic was true.
Oh, that's amazing.
So cancer's a demon. Literally, there's a demon that has come into you and it is sitting there inside of a tumor. That's that. How do you excise it? How do you exercise that? And then, but in a 5-god pantheon where there's 4 gods and the 5th one, does he really count? And the heretics are those that believe in him too. And so there's the 4 that everybody knows exist, and then there's the bastard. That's the name of the 5th god. And is he really a god? And so that creates then a Catholic versus Islam, because it's right there, but also the Cathars. And so there's lots of things that she's quickly pasting in from medieval in a way that's just different for we who grew up with Frank Germanic, English, Saxon, Welsh mythology, and went into Spain and said, yeah, but what about this? And so you get this really well-developed, kind of pre-built, but also not fantasy setting.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
That is going to have to be added to my TBR.
Yes. Are rated R at times.
Oh, okay.
Both in many different ways, but not garishly. I mean, you've read Game of Thrones, so
Yeah.
There are times you'd be like, boy, this is going dark with demons and stuff. We're like, yeah, but I read enough Warhammer, I can handle this. And it isn't so. It isn't like Warhammer off the deep end Warhammer. There's demons and it can feel pretty dark at times.
Okay.
You've got to put the book down, but also it's just very, very, very well done in a way that, like, yeah, the medievals believed that there were demons. Let's assume that. And that's a great way to run with things. That there's that assumption that gives you a lot of breadth for writing.
I'll throw out just a couple of recommendations here. Briefly, so I mentioned DJ Butler earlier. I've been raving this year about his Cunning Man books, which is fascinating because I am not personally a Mormon, but the Cunning Man books are all about the clash between a man's Mormon faith and also his use of folk magic, and the push and pull between that, and like what is acceptable, what is not, when is it like divination and condemned by my faith versus like, no, I'm just using like old grandma's remedies to help this person, and I'm exorcising demons. Surely this is me working,
When's it just essential oils? No.
Right, exactly. So here's the thing, Andrew. Did you know if you put holy water in an essential oil diffuser, it kills vampires? It's a gas chamber for vampires. Yeah. So yeah, the more
you've personally tried this, right?
I cannot disclose.
Fair enough.
But then I'd also say, Amos, I know you've read Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, which I think does a good job of showing like a medieval idea of faith as well, in some really interesting and I think darkly twisted, fun ways.
And it feels so alien too.
Yeah.
Where you're like, I mean, yeah, technically this is Christianity, but like he does a great job of being like, you're right, medieval Christianity was not
very different.
We would not consider them Orthodox today, and they would not have considered us Orthodox. This is radically different.
And the last recommendation that I'll give off the top of my head, and this is one of my favorites, I know it's kind of a long shot for some people, but is Gene Wolfe's Book of the Long Sun. So not Book of the New Sun with Severian, but his sequel series, the second part of the solar cycle, in which the main character is Patera Silk, in a religion that combines the worship of gods, or are they gods, or are they machines that we just misunderstand? And so combining that with also mathematics. They don't make the sign up with a cross, they make the sign of addition and subtraction over people. And but like, okay, are we worshiping machines? But also we're giving animal sacrifices to them. And the gods can also literally like demonically possess people, but are they people or are they robots? And so there's a lot of really interesting things that he plays with in that series. And if, say, somebody's uninterested in the Severian books, Book of the New Sun, you can read Book of the Long Sun on its own. It's a complete standalone series, and is also less dark than the New Sun books. But I think he does some really fun things with religion in that. So
cool.
So, since we have now checked Gene Wolfe off the bingo card for the conversation with Sam,
an hour and 22 minutes, guys.
I will throw out my bingo card of the Fiddler on the Roof. Tevye is one of these religious characters that is just like, he is a touchstone I keep coming back to in my own writing, of just like that, the constant conversation he is having with God and how he's using it both to just like add humor to shitty situations, but then also like asking honest questions and really tough questions. It's beautiful. Like, Fiddler on the Roof is, I think, one of the best pieces of media ever. But
have you read Everything's Illuminated?
Everything's Illuminated. No.
By Jonathan Safran Foer. There was also a movie starring Elijah Wood made of it. Jonathan Safran Foer also wrote the book about 9/11. Everything Loud, Extremely Loud, or something like that. I forget what it's called.
Extremely Loud, Incredibly Close, something like that.
One. Yeah, he wrote that one. But he first wrote, his big first book was Everything's Illuminated. And it's about a character who is just blind as a bat. And so he's got Coke bottle glasses, and he doesn't know anything about his culture except that his family fled Russia, and they were Jewish, and he goes on a just a personal journey back to the original village, which is like what's it called in Fiddler on the Roof?
Anatevka.
Anatevka is completely abandoned. There's like one building left, and it's just wrecked. But you get in between chapters these flashbacks to really zany things that the village decided were the holy things you're supposed to do. Like, half of the men dangle themselves from the rafters on ropes so they don't touch the earth because that's holy, and the other ones have to enter their synagogue on their faces when they're praying because they can't look at heaven. And so there's these two, the Pharisees and the Sadducees of the city, basically. So it's super zany, but also it is semi-autobiographical. So it was Jonathan's journey to home to find his Anatevka, basically.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say, I don't know about any of that, but somewhere the good book says something about chickens.
Somewhere the good book says something about chickens. As the good book says, when a poor man eats a chicken, one of them is sick.
Where does it say that?
All right, it doesn't explicitly say that, but somewhere it says something about a chicken. Good Sabbath.
That's right. So guys, I guess now
nerds. No.
Guilty as charged. Now's the time for you guys to plug what you've got coming up. So Andrew, we'll start with you. What have you got coming up here that people can look forward to, and where can people find you?
Well, right now, if you go to my Instagram, and I know even by the time you post this, it'll still be there. I'm in a anthology called The Honor Anthology with 22 other authors, and we all had the subject honor, and half of us wrote sci-fi, half of us wrote fantasy stories. It's all clean fiction, and my story does take place in Calatai with a paladin who is sent to like the worst possible assignment he can personally imagine, and goes through a bit of a personal journey. So that's what I wrote. So that is launching on November 3rd is the of 2025 for those watching in the future, the far future. But then after that, I've got I've got another cozy that I'll be hopefully kickstarting early next year. That's written and I'm editing it right now. And then the final book in the Needle and Leaf series called Fife and Drum, I'll be kickstarting later, early next year for summer. I'm assuming. So that's what's coming up now.
Very nice. Amos, what do you got coming up here?
All I have out is the Gwambi tetralogy. So I've got the first book here, My Father's Land.
Sweet.
And the second book, My Father's Ghost. And these are like pirate, fantasy, black powder. I like to pitch them as the Treasure Island meets the Chronicles of Narnia. And the premise is a introverted bookworm who has been orphaned by her father. One night is bringing out bread to the town beggar, and all of a sudden finds herself kidnapped by pirates. And the pirates are looking for this ancient city of gold in the New World. And they seem to think that she and the town beggar know where the city of gold is, the Gwambi city. All she knows is that that's where her dad went when he died, and he abandoned her looking for the Gwambi city. And that's all she knows. But as she begins to figure out clues of her father's past and is trying to outsmart the pirates, and then makes friends with the colonists in the New World. And there's griffins, there's a evil sorcerer, there is labor riots, and lots of swashbuckling adventure. And then book 3 of that book, I've got my proof here, My Father's God, comes out in October 14th. So I don't know if that will be out by the time this video is out or not. But I'm very excited. Book 3, I think, is actually my favorite book in the Gwambi tetralogy. So I'm super excited to get the public's eye on this one. There's some really fun developments.
Well, I can say personally, I'm excited for both of your guys' next projects and getting to read them. So, gentlemen, thank you for chatting with me. Thanks for letting me take up almost an hour and a half of your time.
Anytime.
I was gonna say I'd love to have both of you back on the channel again sometime. I'm sure we can't come up with anything to talk about, but
not really. No,
we'll have to do something.
Next time we can just read The Fiddler of the Roof together.
Hey, there you go.
That's right. Can I be the matchmaker?
You could be the matchmaker. Only if I can be the communist.
There you go. All right. Well, to everyone watching, thank you so much for bearing with us. Check out both of these gentlemen. Excellent work. Guys, I don't know if you have anything that you want to say, but in conclusion here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Thank you all for letting me take up your time. And guys, we will see you in the next one. Take care.